Hey, folks. Let me know if sounds okay. I literally just got done with a meeting, so I had to rush over. So let me know if you're in. Let me know if the sound's okay. If you're in, please let me know if the sound's okay or not, and then I will know if I need to make adjustments. I did not have time to check today if everything was working all right. And I also need to close my door. Give me one moment. Let's see. Get my notes up. Hope everybody did okay this past weekend or so. Had a good week last week. Get my notes out. So again, please let me know if you're in the chat. Let me know how the sound is. Because if the sound sucks and you can't hear me, then I need to get everything work. All works well. Good. Hey, Motion VFX, good to see you. Yeah, man. Glad I can be of help. Glad I can be of help. I actually really liked your video that you made. I hadn't seen any other videos of I think it's a comet that you took some video of. So, I mean, it's awesome. I think I really like the music choice for sure. And the noise issues, whenever you starve a sensor of light like that, it's going to happen. It doesn't matter really what camera you use, especially if you're kind of doing the noise reduction yourself and you're not using anything like a neat video. Sometimes helps with noise like that. But sometimes you can't avoid it. And sometimes when it comes to shooting certain things, if you're the only one who captured it, then you have something unique. So don't be so hard on yourself, man. I remember seeing an interesting documentary. It was on Ricky Williams. And I remember seeing a lot of complaints by some people in the community about how it was shot. And I said, well, there was only really one person who had access to Ricky Williams. And so they had a monopoly over how it was going to look. And that was about as good as it's the best Ricky Williams documentary with the information in it that was ever made. So it's, sometimes when you're the only one doing something, it's kind of hard to complain, right? So I actually liked what you put together. So don't downplay your work, man. It's good stuff. So live streams are going to continue like normal after this week. So I'm doing one today because actually my wedding anniversary is tomorrow, so can't do a stream then. So that's why we're having one today, and then I'm going to go back to doing streams every Wednesday at 4 Pacific Standard Time. So be aware of that if you like to come to the streams. Yeah, yeah, it's that's the thing is like, as an artist, you go, okay, I made something, and you can like it can be a good thing, and you can also learn from it. I don't want you to fall, because especially when I was trying to do video productions much earlier in my career, I would get really like worried about how other people would perceive something that I made, and I would not want to show something that I made because I was afraid other people might not like it because it had, noise in it, or it didn't look like it was shot perfectly, or it wasn't lit perfectly, or whatever it was. And I don't want you to go through that, because it's not constructive to becoming a better artist. I think it's good to have it where other people can see your work. And there are always, it doesn't matter how good the work is, there's always going to be people who are going to be critical, like regardless. Some of the best films that would be the best, like critically acclaimed films ever made, you'll have people who will just talk endless trash about it. And I just don't want you to limit what you think you can do, or to, feel bad about any art that you do. You shouldn't feel that way. Well, I shouldn't say you shouldn't feel a way. I want to say I don't want you to feel that way. And it can be a long road to get there. So I was just thinking about there was a video that I saw created a bit ago, and maybe I was not understanding the nuance of what this YouTuber was saying, but they were saying something like, if you create a project that's based around trying to it was something like, you're trying to use a tool, or the whole project is around doing some kind of work to see how a tool works, or something like that, then that means that you're an amateur. And I was thinking, not really, because and I felt like that was a really horrible way to say that, because that kind of, it's like a dagger on some people. And the reality is that there's a lot of failure in the greatest inventors and artists ever. If you look at Da Vinci's work, he had a hell of a lot of failures. And one of his most famous paintings, The Last Supper, is actually a failure. In that painting, he was using a specific technique for mixing the paints. It was like some way of doing it. And when he put the paint on the wall, it actually started flaking pretty much immediately. So it's a big failure, but then it ends up being one of the most well-known paintings ever. So in filmmaking, who is it? Who was it? Hitchcock. Yeah, Hitchcock did a movie called Rope that he calls a huge failure, but in reality, that it's a very interesting experiment, Rope, because he was trying to basically tell a story like all in one shot, or make it look like it was all done all at the same time. And it's the technical skill, and just trying to pull something like that off is very difficult, and should be commendable, even if it was a failure. So there's a really interesting thing called process art, where the art is more in how something was constructed, and a lot less of what the actual result was. So for example, if you have an image of like a supermoon, and you have this very unique perspective, and none of it is composited. It was all like, you shot the image with a specific lens, you got the timing right, and all those things, kind of like where you wait for the moon or the sun to kind of go into a position to get this perfect shot. It's more valuable to people when they know that the process was, you actually shot that, versus you composited it with a few shots put together. So I'm just saying, there's value in the kind of work that you do, even when you're experimenting and trying something new. I'm gonna kind of change this a little bit. Yeah. There we go. So today's going to be a bit interesting. I'm going to talk about Dark for the first part. I watched Dark. I finished it. This last week, I watched Lichen Colony and Suburban Sasquatch, two of my favorite movies ever made. Talk about another movie I saw. For the topics, I'm going to talk about filmmaking, lighting, and cinematography channels. Canon EOS R5 and R6. And I had to rename this particular segment, but another thing I'm going to talk about is, what did I rename it to? Just there's a video that came out that was talking about the Sony a7S III that had some incorrect information that I'm going to kind of talk about, which includes like 8K imaging, why you would want it or not. That 12 megapixels is not 4K native because it's not. They said something about oversampling causes overheating, which that's not a thing. Bad engineering causes overheating, things like that. So I will be going over those, and I will, if there's some time at the end, talk about getting more into education content if you're a video creator and how you can try to break into that. So if I have time at the end, I'll talk about it, because I like to try to answer questions wherever possible, so that we concentrate on that first. Try to center myself up here. I'm always like at an angle. Yeah, so yeah, I finished Dark. I'm assuming that it's over. I'm not gonna spoil anything, but I just wanted to kind of give a recommendation. The reason I watched it was because actually during a stream, somebody mentioned Dark, and I thought I didn't like it, but it was another show that I didn't like, and for some reason, my wife and I stopped watching Dark. I think it's just we forgot about it, so we actually had to watch it all over from the very beginning. And I'll say this. I believe it's the first German Netflix original. So someone tell me in the chat if I'm wrong, but I believe that's what it is. And it's pretty good. And the thing is that what I really like about watching movies that are made in other countries is that the storytelling is done so differently. There's actually a really bad cliche with American films where we like the Hollywood ending, where like everybody's kind of like happy at the end. I'm not going to say whether or not that happens at this one, okay? Because it's really going to be up to your interpretation how you feel about the ending. I just found it to be a very different kind of ending, and the whole experience was very different in talking about the kinds of subject matter that it talks about. Kind of made me feel like, the last few foreign-made Netflix originals I've really liked, Dark and Kingdom. I would recommend them. Dark is very different, so it's kind of hard to keep track of. If you watched The Witcher series, it's similar in that things are kind of like jumbled, and you have to try to piece stuff together however you can. And I'll be honest, I feel like I suffered a brain hemorrhage when I was trying to figure everything out in the third season. I actually got mentally exhausted watching the third season. So it starts out relatively simple, and it gets more and more complex as you try to, unravel this like box of Christmas lights. So it's very interesting. I recommend it. I think it's very interesting the way that it's shot and the way it's put together. There's some very intentional cues that they throw in there that if you're not paying attention, you're not going to see it. So I really enjoyed trying to, pick out those things. The only complaint that I had was, and this is very petty, but they used that rusty iron gate sound effect You know which one I'm talking about. I really hate that sound effect. It's the one that goes like, like you've heard it 100 times. It's like the Wilhelm scream. Whenever I hear it, I go, don't put that in. Okay. If you need an Iron Gate sound, don't use that one. It's kind of like whenever I think it's a hawk, like when they do an outdoor shot and it's like a forest area, they have like a hawk screech. It sounds like the exact same, 3-second sound effect. I've heard it, I don't know how many times. And I know that that's what it is every time I hear it, and it makes me roll my eyes. So no Wilhelm scream, no bird screech sound effect, and no Iron Gate sound effect. Use different ones. Yeah. So that's Dark. Really enjoyed it. Definitely recommended. Witcher 3S1 is a jumbled timeline mess, but not people who read the first book, Sword of Destiny. I don't know why they went Nolan with the TV series. I actually, my wife and I had fun trying to figure out what the timeline was. I guess in the book, is it Sword of Destiny or is it The Last Wish? I believe is book 0. I believe that's book 0, and then I think the first book is Sword of Destiny that you're talking about, because like the way that it was that The Witcher, stop me if I'm wrong, but I read about this to try to understand why it was done that way. The first book is actually a collection of short stories. And that's why that season is put together that way. Is I think if they did it linear, it wouldn't have been as interesting. But having to try to piece together what was going on, I think was kind of fun. And then the books are very straightforward. Like once you get into the books that are not the short stories, it gets pretty straightforward and not very jumbled. So yeah. I really like The Witcher. It made me want to buy the books. I have the entire book series, and we're in book 2 right now. Very good writing. It's very good writing. Like the way that characters are written is perfectly written for a show. So I'm very happy about that. Okay, so for my birthday, my friend put together a movie list, a double feature that I was very happy with. We watched Suburban Sasquatch and Lichen Colony. The Suburban Sasquatch is probably my favorite movie right now, as far as how funny it is. Highly recommended. If you've never seen Suburban Sasquatch, like do a movie party, have some beer, watch Suburban Sasquatch. It's hilarious. Has the funniest kills I've ever seen, and it's not intended to be funny. So please watch it. It's hilarious. Lichen Colony. I think you need to watch Lichen Colony first, because Suburban Sasquatch is so funny you'll be tired from laughing. So maybe do it Lichen Colony first and Suburban Sasquatch if you're going to do both. But both are very funny B films. There's just some stuff that are real head scratchers. So yeah. And I also last night, because we got done watching Dark, and I said, you know what, I need to see something that is more simple, because Dark makes you think a lot. And I was like, I need to watch something that doesn't make me think about anything. So we watched Spaceballs. And I'm a pretty big Mel Brooks fan. I've seen all of his movies multiple times over. I know every line of Spaceballs, so we watched that. Love it. Love that movie. I think there's a few things that are interesting about Mel Brooks movies that I think is really interesting. He's the kind of guy that will just throw the kitchen sink at everything. He'll just go like, okay, I'm going to put in a joke, and the setup is going to be like 15 minutes earlier, and then we're going to pay it off like way the hell later in the movie. I think that's great. And even when they're not funny jokes, it still works for me because it's like, wow, they put a lot of work into this joke. So I appreciate the commitment to making a dumb joke kind of work. The funny thing about Spaceballs is I feel like when they, if you've ever seen the movie, there's like costuming where there's costuming that they have for Druidia, and it looks seriously like they just raided the costume department, and they said, okay, what do we have like a bunch of stuff of? Oh, I know. Here's a bunch of medieval like costumes that look really cheesy. Let's just throw those on some characters and they'll just have their own like it'll just be like a medieval planet. And they just did that. I don't know why they did that other than they just had those those costumes sitting around. It was baffling to me. It was just like, why is it like that? I just thought it was so funny. And it also reminded me of how Rick Moranis is so underappreciated. I think he's so funny. Like he's like one of those actors that can play that sweet dad. Like if you've ever seen Little Giants, he can play that kind of role, or like in Honey, I Shrunk the Kids. I don't know what it is about the way that he plays characters, but it's almost like a natural goofiness that doesn't come off as him trying too hard, which, like, not to bag on Jim Carrey, but sometimes it's like, dude, you're going really far with this. Like it's getting to the point where it's like making you grit your teeth watching some of the stuff he does. But Rick Moranis, even though he's doing really silly things, it never makes you feel that way. So really underappreciated, I think, Rick Moranis. He was in also one of my favorite musicals, which is Little Shop of Horrors, where it has a good ending instead of the stage play ending. Stage play ending of Little Shop of Horrors is really sad. Hey, DJ. So totally like Rick Moranis. Highly recommend most movies he's in. I can't think of a movie that he's in that I don't really like. Maybe Honey, I Blew Up the Kid. I think that one sucks. I don't remember. I've only seen it once, but most of his stuff is very good. Yeah, so let's see how the chat's doing. Pretty intensive time documented. Photographic elements. My first short film we shot in 6 hours. Sound guy didn't show up. Oh, that's great. And it's pretty good except for the sound. I never showed it to anyone because of the sound issues. That's good advice. Hey, if you Good, Bad, and the Ugly was shot with nobody doing sound. It was not shot with sync sound. Actually, if you really pay attention to the movie, there's clips of audio where you can really tell that there's a problem. I remember we actually watched it for an audio production class. And the interesting thing was, if you listen, there's like the crickets in the background when there's like a wolf howling or something like that. I think it's in the beginning of the movie. And you can really hear, like, if you're looking for things that are wrong in something like a movie like that, you're going to find things. You know, the syncing of the voices aren't going to be perfect to the faces, for example. And some people can't stand that, right? There's certain things with the lighting that doesn't quite work. There's some shots that are just clearly underexposed. There's some that are clearly overexposed. But you know what? Good, Bad, and the Ugly is one of the most famous, most critically acclaimed films ever made. It's when people think of Westerns, it's up there with the best. And it really is a really great film. But, something like sound, they paid attention in post because they knew they couldn't do sync sound to make sure that it worked with what they were trying to do. So, if you still have it, you can try to cut some stuff in, but, just because the sound isn't great, doesn't mean you can't make something out of it. If you really don't like the audio that much, you can try to overdub some stuff into it. Or you can take some of the shots and make a different kind of thing out of it. Maybe you can make a music video out of it, or you can make a number of things out of it if you just don't like that part of it. And then sometimes for short films, sometimes you can get away with certain things. So I mean, it depends on how bad it is. I don't know how bad it is, but it doesn't mean that you can't show it to people. So I mean, the best thing that happens is that you learn from your mistakes, right? You don't know. Maybe some people would really like it. They're one of the filmmakers that are really interesting to watch is a filmmaker named Neil Breen. His movies are all terrible, but he has a fan base, and they show up to watch his movies whenever they play in their towns. So you never know. Waterworld was a commercial failure, but it's a good movie in my opinion. Yeah, I mean, some people like Waterworld. It's definitely a failure as far as box office kind of movie. I mean, if by box office, I mean what I mean is a blockbuster kind of movie, because the point of those is to make as much money as possible, and that lost money, I believe. That one is so interesting. Like, you just look up what they did to make that movie, because it's really something. Like, I remember reading that they didn't have a toilet on that floating city that they create that's in the beginning of the movie, and when they had someone who had to go to the restroom, they had to like bring them somewhere in order to do it. It's really crazy. It was very, very expensive because whoever was running the production just did not know how to say no to certain requests. That's what I think. But yeah, I mean, a lot of people like it. I think there's a lot wrong with it. Yeah, I think the villain is my favorite part of the movie. Dark was so difficult keeping track of each person was in their relationship to other people. Yeah, it ended up where my wife and I were like, after we'd watched the last episode, the finale, we were like still going back through our heads, like who was related to who, and why, who appears in the last scene and why, and that kind of stuff. So it's good that a movie or a show actually makes you do that, where you actually have to think more afterward. It's not you just watch it and then you never think about the movie again. That kind of sucks. But having movies that make you actually talk about it afterward, I think that's great. Watch the stream while doing roto work. Oh, dude, you're doing rotoscoping? My heart goes out to you. Babylon Berlin. I'm not sure what that is. Dark was like Charlie Day GIF trying to find correlations, but between characters. Yeah. I forget the person that they're talking about. But yeah, it's like that. Witcher season 1 was a jumbled timeline. Yeah, I think I was okay with it. When watching Good, Bad, and the Ugly, if you look close enough, you'll notice that Clint Eastwood is in the film. Yeah. Ankar Askar. Hey, Tony. Hope you're doing well. I hope you're doing well too. Ankar, good to see you. Welcome to the stream. Welcome to the stream. Okay. I'm going to crack this open. Neil Breen just released a masterclass, by the way. Yeah, dude. I'm not watching that. That's the Neil Breen thing I can do without. I'm not interested in watching that. I watched a review of it, but there's no way I'm watching that. I hear he's not such a nice guy. All right, so let's get into this. All right, so topics for today: talk about filmmaking, lighting, cinematography channels, and some things I have to say about it. Canon EOS R5 and 6, because there was like an update on the specs or whatever. There was a really funny thing in one of the ads. There's a popular camera channel. Well, that one, basically, I'm going to talk about some things that a very popular photography channel. I'm not sure if it's really photography exactly, but it's more like camera gear channel. They try to explain some things about the A7S III and why it's good. Like, the weird thing is that with the A7S III, it's just rumors. So I don't know why that's news. But anyway, there were some things, like I was sent this video from a friend, and they were like, what do you think about this? And there's just like a lot of incorrect things that they were saying. And I did try to make sure that I wasn't, not getting the nuance of what they were saying, but they were just saying the wrong stuff. So I'll go over that. Okay, so filmmaking, lighting, and cinematography channels. The reason why I'm talking about this is because I was sent a few in my email as examples of some ways that you can do lighting and all that. And this channel is not really going to talk a lot about lighting and those kinds of things, because I think that there are other people that are probably better to teach that. I know what I know to do the work that I do. And I would more, what I like to do is produce stuff, and I like writing more, and I like doing editing and post-production. As far as doing like the lighting and all that, the physical, like put the thing, at a certain place, put this diffuser on, all that kind of stuff. There are a lot of other people out there that are probably more experienced that can do a better job than me. The thing is that what I think lacks in a lot of those channels, though, is not in their ability to light a scene to copy how someone else did it. That's usually not the problem that I have. So I'll do a compliment sandwich. Okay. The first thing is that these people tend to know what they're talking about as far as the technicals on how to do something. Okay. So, there's that, which is good. You want to learn from someone who seems to know what they're doing. And there's some that are a lot better than others. I'm not going to say they're all good. And I'm not going to name any particular channels. It's usually pretty obvious who would be better. But the thing that they lack consistently is providing a foundation of knowledge to their subscribers to understand not only the foundational understanding of lighting in general, but also the why. Like, why do you do things? Why do you light a certain way? Okay, they'll say, just to give you an example, okay, they'll say, okay, here's how you make this cinematic lighting through a window. They won't explain what they mean by that, because my view on all of this is that cinematic stuff only works as long as it's working within the confines of the subject matter. Okay, so let me explain what I mean. There's a big difference between something like The Office and a show like The Borgias or like Game of Thrones, right? These are totally different things. And if you do lighting like The Borgias in The Office, it won't work. Okay? So that's what I mean by lacking foundational knowledge, because if you don't have foundational knowledge, you're going to see, oh, that's a way to light a scene cinematically. So I'm going to apply that, like I'm going to do a paint by numbers thing, and I'm going to apply that to whatever I'm doing. And you'll notice that quite often, this is what happens with certain channels. They will use this same kind of technique with whatever it is they're doing, regardless of context. And sometimes it looks really weird to me. And I have kind of a problem with that. So let me try to go through what I mean by more foundational knowledge. Okay. So let me see here. There's a couple things. Okay. So where did I put it? Yeah. So they don't explain why you would light a certain way, or why you would shoot something in a certain way. And most of the lighting fundamentals comes down to a few things. And it's understanding your lighting ratios, which a lot of times is not discussed. They'll say, oh, you want to have this soft light, but they don't really explain why you want it soft. They won't explain why you want to use some kind of diffuser to make it soft. What is the intention of doing that? Why are you doing that? The hardness of the light, meaning is it diffused or is it harsh? Because depending on what you're doing, you're going to want one or the other. Often what I see is people saying, oh, you want this soft light, you're going to use a softbox, or you're going to use a diffuser and all these things. Really, it depends on what you're doing. Sometimes hard light is what you want. Direction of light. Is it coming from the top? Like if you watch The Godfather, for example, there's a table scene where you have the Godfather sitting there with all the other bosses, right? And what Coppola and the team did during that scene was a faux pas, or whatever you call it. Like, nobody was lighting top-down lighting where the character's eyes were like dark, like there's almost like a corpse. But the thing is that that was the intent of that lighting, and the way that it looked was supposed to look like that. And it was supposed to help tell the story. So if somebody was telling Coppola, you're not supposed to light like that, that's not cinematic, that would be wrong. There's a reason why it's lit that way. The direction of the light and where it was placed was what allowed for that kind of look. If you would have put it where it's lighting the eyes and you got all the catch lights and everything, it's not the same look, is it? So you got to understand that, okay? There's a reason to put a light somewhere. Nothing should be arbitrary, okay? And the utility of the light. That's another thing that people don't talk about. This light that I have, it only works if I'm sitting like in this spot, and actually it's lit for when I'm doing my normal work, which is for a computer that's over here. Because I have two different computers. And it doesn't really work the way that it's intended if I'm not in the right place. There's a reason why a show like the 1990s Star Trek Next Generation, well, it's late 80s and 90s, but regardless, there's a reason why it's lit that way. If they tried to do very specific directional lighting to try to look cinematic, according to what these people on YouTube say, it would never work, because they're lighting for this big set, and they need to have some even lighting and some situations where they can maybe prop up one light and use mostly the kind of light that's already available, because they need to get their shots quickly. They have a lot of work to do and not a lot of time to do it in, right? A show like The Office is another show that's done very, very similar, but also the intent is that it's supposed to look like an office building. It's not supposed to look like a dramatic room. You know, it's not supposed to look like a dramatic area in, medieval Europe. Okay. It's made to look very, very different intentionally. If The Office looked like Game of Thrones, it wouldn't work. No matter how cinematic anyone wants to try to say it looks, it actually won't work at all, because you'll be asking, why is this lit this way? This doesn't make any sense. And that's what I ask a lot of times when I see some really interesting, I'm going to use the word interesting, commercials that are done by people who are saying, oh, I remember seeing one. They were like, oh, I love shooting this way because it really tells a story and it's so cinematic. And I was watching it and I was like, okay, this is an advertisement for a school and it looks depressing because the lighting looked depressing and the way that it was shot and graded looked depressing. Okay. So I think that when you're watching, or if you're, going to subscribe to a channel, I think that you need to have a litmus test. They need to be able to explain to you why you would be doing something. And if they're telling you that their way, like it's a paint by numbers kind of, step 1, step 2, step 3 kind of way of doing some cinematic lighting kit, either you need to know why you're trying to light that way so that they don't have to tell you, and all you're trying to do is, paint by numbers, or they need to do the job of explaining to you what it's supposed to mean when you light a certain way or when you shoot a certain way. If you don't get those things, you're going to be lighting stuff to look cinematic when it won't work for your piece. Okay. I won't say it will never work, but most likely won't, because you don't know why you would do it that way. And that's where I go, like, you need to, like, if you watch a show like The Borgias or Tudors, for example, and then watch The Office, and you're saying that one of them looks more cinematic than the other, that's not true. They're actually equally, in my opinion, this is how I see it, they're equally as cinematic as each other, because they all help tell the story that they're intended to tell. The Office, if it's shot like Tudors, doesn't work. The Office works the way that it's shot because it looks realistic. It looks like this is a place you could actually go to. Okay. So what was the other thing? Oh yeah. So another movie, a couple more movie recommendations. If you want to see where the movie itself and the way it's done kind of flies in the face of what a lot of these YouTube channels will tell you looks cinematic, watch The Godfather, one of the top movies ever, according to critics. Watch Goodfellas. In Goodfellas, The Shot, which if you just look up The Shot Goodfellas, it's the Steadicam shot. And look at the lighting that they use in that scene, and you tell me if that follows any of the rules that someone tells you for cinematic lighting. Realistically, it just looks like natural lighting, okay? So the trick is on that to make it look natural. The way that scene is cinematic is how everything goes together. The movement of the camera, the way that it's lit, yes, is important, but the costuming, the extras especially. Like, look at how many people they put in the scene, and also like what the character is doing and how they interact with the environment, and you can fully see what's going on and what makes that more cinematic than just lighting. I talked about it previously, Good, Bad, and the Ugly. Like, most of that is shot with a bald sun. Like, most of that has noon lighting, which everyone will tell you is god awful to shoot in, but it works so well in that movie. And ask yourself, how did they get it to look like that and be considered one of the top movies ever made? And it doesn't follow most of the rules that people are going to tell you. I mean, a lot of people try to copy the look of Good, Bad, and the Ugly, and it breaks all the rules. So yeah, so here's what I recommend, okay? Before you go and start, watching your favorite cinematographer who has a YouTube channel or a YouTuber that makes really good tutorials on how to do certain lighting, here's what I recommend. Research stuff like lighting ratios, the types of lighting, diffusers, like all those different things. Watch movies that you like and break the scenes down when you understand those lighting fundamentals, okay? First, understand what all the things are with lighting, okay? Then watch some examples of different lighting. And I gave some, okay? I gave some really good examples here. The Borgias, the Crown, those have a kind of similar kind of way that they go about making the scenes look like it because they're period pieces. And then watch something like The Office, watch Godfather, any of the top critically acclaimed films, watch those and try to see what they're doing and how they're doing it. Sometimes you'll notice like they have a set that just has like plain old set lighting with nothing fancy going on, okay? The next thing, look at old master painters and how they used light and shadow, because a lot of times people today copy them and then they start going a little bit too far. So I'll explain. I recommend looking at work by Rembrandt and Rubens because, in my opinion, they do a really good job of doing natural light in very creative ways. Okay. A lot of people know Rembrandt as the guy who does the triangle under, the other side of the face. Okay, here's the key, and then you have the triangle here. That's not the only thing he does, but he did make that famous, I guess. But the thing is that they did was they're able to do very interesting things with their subjects, with subject isolation from the background, and sometimes not isolating them from the background for very specific reasons. And a lot of times they use like one light source. So I'm actually going to dig into an email that I sent someone as an example. So here, let's see here. So that should be a link to a bunch of Rembrandt work. Yeah. So, just look at the way that Rembrandt did these pieces. And especially on those, I really like the night watch. Look at the way that shadow is used. Is there a lot of rim lighting? You know, are you noticing like fancy things with rim lights and, you know, getting another light on the opposite side to get like, you know, catch the hair? Which shots have catch lights in the eyes and which ones don't? There's another one called Old Man in a Cap, I believe, that has very interesting lighting. And again, no catch lights in the eyes. And ask yourself, why did he opt not to have catch lights? Right? For Rubens, the one that I really like, this one. Let me make sure I get a, there we go. This is not the full piece. That's disgusting. Oh, well. So this is kind of a close-up. It's not the full piece. But this one, old woman and boy with candle, that shot is really interesting. And again, it breaks a lot of the rules that people will tell you that you have to follow today. Notice that they're not separating her from the background, and there's a reason for that. I just want to make sure that I explain some things about compositing and why you light things for compositing in specific ways and why you might want to do it like this instead. In compositing, you do need to have edges to your subject. I think this is just what I'm thinking, like in my head of what happened, is that since compositing for shots became very commonplace, people just think that you're supposed to always have rim lighting on people and you have to get like these lights to hit a character at different angles. That's not necessary. There's a lot of times where having your character melt into the darkness of the background totally makes sense. Okay? Because if that fits the mood and the feel you're going for and it looks right, then that's what you should be doing. You should not just be adding lights because someone told you to. Okay? And a lot of times that's what happens with these channels. They'll tell you, oh, you gotta do this. You gotta add a light to separate from the background, right? And if you look at either Rubens or if you look at Rembrandt's work, you'll notice that they're able to separate or not separate characters from the background with a number of things. In some of them, you'll notice that they just throw a light on the background and the background's a different color than the clothing that the subject's wearing in the foreground. Okay. So, you know, look up stuff like this. Look at a lot of old paintings. If you haven't taken like an art appreciation kind of class where you go over a lot of the older masters, like before it started to get into the more abstract kind of stuff, but like the old masters that were trying to basically do what photography is now, you'll see a lot of this kind of stuff. And it's the kind of stuff that you can try to emulate even if all you have is a window most of the time. Okay. So, you know, look there. And also when you're looking at any of this stuff, you need to identify as an artist, you need to ask yourself, why are scenes or why is like a painting or why is a photograph lit the way it is? And you have to assume that everything done in the image is intentional. Okay. You have to assume that everything is intentional. And you need to think, what does the way that it's made make me feel? Maybe that's a weird way to say that. But you need to ask yourself, how does this thing make me feel when I look at it? And what is making me feel that way? You need to ask, where are the lights coming from? What angle are they hitting things? And you'll know this by the shadow, okay? Does the lighting look natural or not? This is actually really important because if your lighting doesn't look natural, people are usually going to tell, okay? And sometimes you don't want it to look natural. It depends on what you're doing. If you're doing some weird piece where like reality is fractured, lighting probably doesn't have to look natural. It probably helps tell the story if the lighting doesn't look correct, if it looks weird, right? This is what happens with lenses, right? When you add lens distortion, when a character is feeling woozy or they're drunk or they someone drugged them or something like that. Usually use a wide angle lens or a fisheye, or you make it look really, really strange. And, you know, people usually get that, and lighting can do the same thing for you. What does rim lighting actually do to the shot, and why would you need it? Okay, because I feel like it's actually overused now. What does the absence of rim lighting mean? What do catch lights, the lights that appear in the eyes that give it that sparkle, what do catch lights do for a shot? Why would you have it there, and why wouldn't you have it there? Okay. And finally, to really kind of understand lighting, I really recommend that you practice interviews. Okay. And you don't have like interview shots, which is basically just a headshot, right? And start with just one light source and do what you can with that light source, adding diffusers, bouncing it off of things, trying to get like, sometimes all you need is like one light hitting at one angle and then a bounce card or a reflector at the other angle. And then you've got two sources right there, right? So, and how you angle the light off of that singular light with different reflectors can totally change the feel of a piece. Sometimes if you've got one of those reflectors with like 5 pieces, play around with it, you know, use all the different kinds of reflectors that come with it and see what it does. And once you've exhausted the possibilities of using the one light source, then start adding other light sources, because then you'll start to know, what do I actually need? You know, sometimes in an interview, you'll see people walk around with like 4 lights. Generally, when I'm doing a headshot for an interview, I only need one light. So, you know, and I don't need to have an octabox or something like that, or a softbox or anything like that. It's not necessary, usually. So there's those things. The other thing that I didn't mention, was the other thing that a lot of times the cinematography channels don't talk about is, well, what they don't do is a lot of times they do not take a holistic approach to filmmaking. Like, I think this is like, I see it this way because I didn't start out like ever wanting to really learn cinematography. That wasn't my major thing. What I wanted to learn was like writing, editing, compositing, producing. How do you, you know, get money for a piece? How do you do the management? Like, I love doing assistant directing. That's one of my favorite things. Like, there's nothing that gets my heart racing and gets me like, you know, when you have a day of work where it feels like everything went by so fast, but you feel exhausted, but like a good kind of exhausted. For me, being an AD is like that. Okay. It's like my favorite thing to do on set. And for some people, they hate it, but I just like, I'm in my zone when I do it. And anyway, the reason why I'm saying that is because I have a different kind of view than someone who grew up wanting to be like a photographer or a cinematographer. And what I see in filmmaking is that there are so many pieces that make something look cinematic that you cannot just isolate it to lighting. Okay. It doesn't work like that. And there are photographers that will tell you that, and that's not really the thing. Okay. There's so many things that go into it. And you see this happen a lot as failures in student films. They'll think about lighting. They'll think about a lens. They'll think about a camera. They'll even go and rent a, you know, old Panavision 35 millimeter camera to make their piece, but they won't take into account costuming. They won't take into account getting a good location. I mean, those two things alone can make or break a scene. In Dark, just for example, if you haven't seen Dark, there's 2 locations that are perfect. There's like a bridge with this old stone, like it's like the stone, you could tell it's old because it's raised like this far up, and you got these deep pits in the stone. You have these street lights around it, and it doesn't matter if they shoot it during the day or the night, it looks like a movie. And they don't even have to do that much to it to make it look awesome. Okay. Then there's the cave that they use, the exterior of the cave. Okay. Those 2 locations are gold. And you won't see a lot of channels that talk about cinematography really talking about locations like that. And, you know, if you're watching these things, and they're like, trying to show you how to light something cinematic in this boring room like what I have behind me, which a lot of them do that. They're missing some stuff, okay? They're missing things. And most, if not all, even semi-competently shot movies will have so much effort put into the locations and the costuming. The costuming is vital as well. There's nothing more student filmy than a guy walking around in a white t-shirt in a white walled room. There's nothing more like amateur than that. And I remember seeing it back when I was in college years ago, and you still see it today, because there's no lens that's going to make up for having a white t-shirt against a white wall. Doesn't matter how nice your lighting is, it's going to look boring because there's nothing really going on there. Okay. So, those are the other things that you need to also look at if you want to be a real filmmaker. Okay. You really need to look at those other things. It is maybe, for some cinematographers, they might say, well, you don't really need to know all those other things, or I'm not sure if they would say that. But to be a true filmmaker, in my opinion, the true filmmaker in the sense, you need to have a holistic view. Okay. If you push yourself to only be thinking about it in, one specific, dissected area of shooting something or creating something, you're not going to get the whole picture. Okay, so I hope that makes sense. And again, I'm not trying to bag on channels that do this. I just think that there's a lot of room for improvement is all. I think they do mostly a good job of helping you to figure out how to do a specific thing. But it's kind of like some of the stuff on my channel. Like if you already were going, I just want to create a LUT for this thing. Like I will give you a tutorial to show you how to create that thing. Okay. And there's some other areas where I could improve as well, which is giving some more foundational knowledge. Some of the videos I already have, like, for example, the crop factor video is really foundational knowledge of what it is and how you calculate it. So you don't have to go and ask somebody else for the crop factor of anything anymore. You should be able to know how to get your own crop factor numbers from that video. The second thing being like the memory card one, where I was talking about how to calculate if your memory cards are going to work, and then batteries. Like, I mean, all of these things are foundational knowledge, so you can figure things out for yourself. A lot of these other things, though, understanding like why you color grade a certain way and all that kind of stuff, I haven't done that. So that's where I would say that's my bad. But I'm not sure my channel's really focused on that. I kind of just create little tutorials here or there, which might be the case of some of these other cinematography channels. So yeah. Okay. That's that. Let's go on to other things. So the Canon EOS R5 and R6, crazy things are afoot. So yeah, these are, if you don't know, Canon, I guess, tried to pull out some real beef in these cameras. The 1DX3 looks like a good camera, but like not many people I feel like are gonna really own that one. I mean, it's like $6,000 something, I believe. It's just one of those, like, in my opinion, specialty cameras that are going to hit like a certain market very, very well, like the previous version of the camera did, the 1DX2. For sports photographers, it's like the camera, I guess. But the R5 and R6, there's some funny things about these. First of all, I watched the Canon announcement, which those are like really hard to get through. Yeah, those like launch things, they're mostly really boring, and they're clearly just like marketing stuff, which I'm never a fan of that kind of thing. But I thought it was so funny because I was watching, and there's I think it was for the R5. There's a guy. I'm not sure what kind of movies or whatever he makes, but he said, as a cinematographer, having in-body image stabilization really makes my skills look better. And then I kid you not, it like cuts to him putting it on a gimbal. It's like the next shot, like after he says that, he's like putting the camera on a gimbal. I'm like, what? Like, I thought you just said that in-body stabilization is so important. If you're going to put it on a gimbal, then what the hell's the point? I thought that was so funny. Marketing, man. Marketing. Gotta love it. Maybe I'm like, I pay way too much attention to detail, but like I do pay attention to stuff like that. And it's like, why did you, if that was the case, he said like, not only about the in-body stabilization, but also like that he could dumb his rig down, so he didn't have to have all this stuff. And it's like, okay, but you're putting it on a gimbal. Like you got to bring that thing with you, and then you've got to attach it with a gimbal. You got to make sure that it's all balanced. Like there's so many things you have to do with that. I just thought that was so funny. Anyway, the thing that I find is interesting is Canon not too long ago said that in-body image stabilization, because Fujifilm did the same thing. They're like, in-body stabilization is not good. It like ruins the image, and that our way of doing stabilization is better. So for Canon, it was electronic stabilization, which is not. I wouldn't say it's necessarily better than a lot of things. Like, I mean, electronic, you can do that in post. So I'm not sure why you would do it in camera unless it was like for a live recording or you didn't want to do it later. But I would not say that electronic stabilization is necessarily better than IBIS. I would say both are probably equally as terrible or good as each other. It depends on how well the stabilization performed. Even lens stabilization can look like trash depending on how it does it. So probably zero stabilization done with either lenses or an in-body stabilization mechanism or in post is really good. And usually having a Steadicam that's balanced and operated properly, having a dolly that's operated properly and balanced and doesn't have any rocks in it, slider shots that are done correctly. I mean, those things are usually going to be better than any kind of handheld or any of those other things. So yeah, so all I gotta say is that in-body stabilization is, I think it's fine as long as it works correctly. There's sometimes where it doesn't work right and it kind of bugs me. And usually if they say like, they're saying it's 8 stops, but I don't think so. It's always going to depend on the lens, because you're not going to get 8 stops of in-body stabilization that works with an unstabilized 500 millimeter lens. It's just not going to happen. Not with IBIS. There's just too much correction that's going to need to happen for it to really work. So I'm pretty sure that means for something like a 50 millimeter lens to like a 75 millimeter lens. But if I know IBIS, the longer the lens, the worse it gets as far as stabilization. And also, depending on how smart the mechanism is, it is either going to fight against you or not. I know that one of the problems that I have with this camera, the XH1, is if you're doing video and you're kind of, trying to follow something, sometimes the image stabilizer will kind of like stick onto something when you don't want it to. So I don't really like IBIS for video anyway. I actually think it's better for photo, to be frank. I really do. I think it's a lot better for photos, because you can use a lens like this 18 to 35 Sigma with stabilization, and it works really great. So one of their big selling points with the R5 is this 8K video thing, and they're doing RAW with it. And I'm like, why? I don't really understand that, other than to get into the K number wars. Not really interested in 8K video, to be honest. 6K is already pushing it. 4K RAW, even in 5.1, you're talking about a lot of data. So 8K, if you're talking about like 10-bit, it's gonna be a lot of data, like a lot. So it's no wonder that one has, I believe, a CF Express slot. Yeah, a CF Express slot, because dude, the data is gonna be insane for doing 8K video. If you're thinking about getting this camera for 8K, I really, I wouldn't do it. The reason is because there's plenty of good cameras that are cine cameras, and I'm talking about video, by the way. If you're thinking about getting this for video, I don't think it's a good idea. Okay, even with the 8K thing. The reason is because with the amount of money that you're likely to spend to use that 8K video, because your computer is going to have to be able to process all that. Okay, so most likely, you're going to have to invest some money. By invest, I mean just spend money on some gear just to use it properly. The good thing, though, about that camera, I guess, is that it has like an HQ 4K downsampling or super sampling mode, which might work really well. It might give you really, really good images. So, but if you're trying to get it for 8K production, I don't think that's a good idea, to be honest. Because most likely your finals are going to be in HD. And for the few of you doing 4K productions, there's plenty of cameras that are more situated for video recordings that have other features that are going to give you like 5.7 to 6K for sometimes less money, depending on which camera you get. It can be less than this new camera. And it can give you a lot of the features that you're looking for. So I just don't think it's worth it to do 8K. So the good thing is that it should have 10-bit internal, so that's good. And then the R6 looks like it's similar, but it's not as good because it's not going to include 8K, which to me is fine. I don't think that most people are going to need that at all. I think even high-end productions don't really need 8K unless it's for very specific shots that are usually compositing shots. And if you're worried about compositing shots and you don't really have a whole lot of money, probably whatever you do with a 4K raw image is going to be good enough for the kind of market you're hitting. So, yeah. And I guess with the R6, it's not going to have like as good of a viewfinder, and like it's 20, I think it's like 20 megapixels instead of in the 40s for megapixels. I just like I think that there's a few things that kind of made cameras like this a little bit less desirable. I think the first thing is that Canon's a little late to the party in the specs game, simply because you've got all these other brands that have come out already with 10-bit internal. And then having RAW that's external now, it's almost like that's old, because you have the Pocket 4K and the Pocket 6K that are under $2,000 that have internal RAW. And not only that, but it's Blackmagic RAW, which has 6, I always forget the number, I think it's 6 different compression rates and does not require external recording, which helps because that means you can actually go more compact than with these Canon cameras. Now, of course, the selling factor is going to be, oh, but they're full frame, which to me doesn't mean anything. It's a large format, right? Because Super 35 is the standard format for movie making. And, you know, there are LF cameras that are being used for a lot of things now, but these are not looks that could not be achieved with other means. And especially if you're talking about spending less, you know, as little money as possible for production, trust me, Super 35 APS-C is going to be good enough for whatever you're doing. Okay. So yeah, this will segue. So I got to blink because my eyes are dry. This will segue into the next topic. I read this line. It was just kind of like a throw-in line. It said, the R6 will have less pixels, so that means that it'll probably have better low light performance. I don't know what they're talking about. That's not like a thing, okay? Like, I've heard that. There is no direct correlation between having less pixels and it being better low light performance, okay? And I'll explain a bit on that. I'm talking about stills, not necessarily video, because video is going to be dependent on a whole bunch of things. But even in that, it doesn't always mean that it's going to be better. So I'll talk about that a little bit later. So I don't know why people keep saying that. It's not true. So, okay, let's check the chat. Artist stunning, great examples. The candlelight is beautiful. Yeah, thanks, man. I really think that going back and looking at a lot of those older paintings really will show you what you can do with a lot less. Like these guys had less. They had paints, they often used a window light or candles, that kind of thing, and they were able to get what they have. Obviously they had to use a little bit more of their imagination, right, to kind of fill in some things to make it look a little bit different. But you should be able to do similar things with lights and a camera. Deacons has a good podcast about lighting where he describes a talk he gave. He explained 3-point lighting in great detail, then said, I never do it this way. Yeah. 3-point lighting. I think it was an older way of doing lighting, and it's taught a lot because it teaches you the major things. You have your key, you have your fill, and then you have your highlights, or you have your rim lighting, or whatever, like external stuff, which is usually, key, fill, and then you have like a light that would do the hair light, right? So if you do that for every shot, it's your movie's probably going to look fake. And it actually, that kind of lighting works better for compositing than it does for a lot of other things. If you're doing an interview, it can work really well, because you usually want to get that subject away from whatever the background is. If you're doing like a narrative, it really does depend. In dark, I'm just it's on the top of my head because I just finished watching it. In dark, there's most of it does not have that kind of lighting. There are whole scenes that are just like one window light. It's probably like an HMI or something that's blasting light through there, and it's a set, but it's still like one light source. So, but it's good to know the 3-point lighting because it helps you to understand those different ways of using light. Okay. So, start teaching people 3-point lighting for film works for interviews, not creating mood for a scene. Yeah. And even in interviews, depending on the kind of interview it is, you might want to use different techniques. If you're doing like interviews for a murder documentary, you might want to do the interviews a little bit different to add some drama to it. But if you're doing interviews for a doctor's office for a commercial, obviously that's not going to fly. So, in dark, the child room, which is ... no spoiler, but it was great. Yeah. That emotion VFX. Yeah. I know what you're talking about. It's very well done. Voice makes you a perfect AD. That's what my mentor told me. He said, you would be a great AD. And I said, okay, what is that? And, yeah. Lots to try. Thanks for insight. No problem. Anyone else in the chat quit looking at cameras when you got BMP-CC 4K? Yeah, I think that the Pocket 4K is a really, really good tool. And the only reason I would want to get another camera is just because I want one. It wouldn't be because I really need to have it. The 6K version, the fact that it's like artifact free is awesome. Like there's no, the thing that really sold me on that one was that the guy was complaining. He said that he was having a problem with aliasing on it, and the image actually had no aliasing. The problem was that it was so clean. It's so clean and it's so sharp that when you took like this image, it was a guy with like this check pattern that was super, super tight. It actually caught every single detail with no artifacts. I actually had never seen that before out of a camera so cheap. It was incredible. Yes, two best reviews, not even thinking about it. BMBCC 4K all day, every day. Yeah, it's a good camera. Thank you for waking me up from the full frame mindset coma. Yeah, dude, you're really not going to need it. I'm telling you, you're not going to need it. And I can understand why some cinematographers might really want to use it, like the larger formats. But the reality is that for most of us, it's just not necessary. I mean, you have lenses now that you can buy for relatively cheap, that if all you're talking about is trying to get blurrier backgrounds, you can do that. And in a lot of movies, having that super shallow depth of field is not really necessary. A lot of really great films are shot at like f8 on super 35 or a like T8, f8, whatever. It's just, if it's a shallow depth of field thing you need, it's just not, it's just not needed. I think that for some manufacturers, they're trying to get away from cramming too many pixels into that surface area of a sensor. And I think like a company like ARRI, for example, wants to, in their mind, from my understanding, a company like them want to have their sensors where they have the ideal number of pixels for the size of the sensor. That's my understanding of what they're trying to do. And I think that for them, in order to really get the resolution that people were asking for like 4K products, they needed to get like a bigger sensor. I think that's what's going on. But for some other manufacturers where they're talking about putting like, an 8K sensor into Super 35, I mean, you're talking about a lot of pixels crammed into that little thing. So 8K is overkill for most machines, time consuming, and the amount of data. I agree. I remember listening to someone's live stream where they talked about how they recorded 8K RAW out of a Red camera because a company asked for it for their learning video. Okay, it was for education, not for like IMAX or something. They recorded 8K, and then when the client got it to do their own editing and stuff, they couldn't do it. Like they couldn't even use the footage. Ridiculous. Okay, that's ridiculous. They probably assume less pixels equal bigger pixels. Is that a thing? Yes, that actually does happen, but it doesn't mean that the image at the end of the day is going to be less noisy, and I'll explain. Expressive imagery for sure. Regarding P4K, it's all I need and does it well. Yeah, if you're doing HD productions, which most of the world is doing, it does the job really well. The only complaints that I really have about that camera is aliasing in very specific circumstances. This kind of dimpled fabric, for example, depending on how far I'd be away from the camera, you will see aliasing in certain situations. So I can't say that I would if this camera, not this camera, if the Pocket 4K had an aliasing filter, I probably would like it less, even though it would have less artifacts. I've learned how to shoot around the artifacts because like it would make the image sharper. Or I mean, the anti-aliasing filter would make the image less sharp. So I don't think that an aliasing filter is really necessary for the camera, but the 6K sensor basically fixes a problem of aliasing from my understanding. So, my thing is, if you're having a problem with the Pocket 4K due to aliasing, get the 6K version. My comment assumes the sensor size is fixed. Yeah, that I'll explain why that, like, I understand why people are saying that stuff, but in reality, it usually doesn't work out that way. Emotion VFX, the clipping channel is still a noise on the Pocket, and I got some corrupt single frames lately. Gets worse with better quality. Clipping channels. You mean like you're clipping like the RGB channels? I mean, if you're using the false color, if you keep everything out of red, you shouldn't have that many problems with it. If it's a problem with like the red channel, like if you're having problems with like it's reds and cyans and sometimes yellow, if you use the red eye PP2 gamut mapping, it will fix all of those gamut mapping problems. Okay, so yeah, if it's red and blue channels that are clipping, like you're getting that nasty, like if you shoot an LED light, for example, use red eye PP2. It will fix the problem, guaranteed. You will not see it. I was seeing it being fixed even in 10-bit ProRes. So if you are seeing that issue, even using red eye PP2 gamut mapping, send me the file and I'll take a look, because there's some other ways around it that do not require red IPP2, but you have to. I think it's a problem where the camera is actually recording more than the Blackmagic Gen 4 wide gamut. So the big trick is actually getting the footage into red wide gamut RGB, which is a much larger color gamut, and then you won't have those color gamut clipping problems. You'll see a similar issue if you try to take the Pocket 4K color and you put it into ARRI color space, you'll see more clipping. But if you put it into red RGB, you won't really see it. So even shooting like LED lights, I can get rid of the clipping by using red IPP2. ACES is a problem with it, though. ACES can lead to issues. Is aliasing when something looks wonky, like waves through a texture? Yeah. I noticed that with one interview. With the interviews, what you need to do is this is why testing your camera with different fabrics is really, really important. I did that when I first bought the first thing I did was put several different shirts up, and I put them over like a chair, and then another one I had them flat, and you shoot them with different frequency, which means, like, you know, if you have like a 50 to 100 lens, shoot it at 50 millimeters and make sure it's like the focus is perfect. Shoot it at 75 and then shoot it at 100 and see where that frequency pattern, like once the little details start to cause moire, which is that waviness that you see, you want to know when that's going to appear. And most cameras have that. Most cameras are going to have a problem with aliasing in some way. Anti-aliasing filters usually help with that, but even with AA filters, sometimes you'll see it anyway. You'll see it often with certain fabrics on shirts. You'll see it on roofs of buildings. You'll sometimes see it on really, really thin lines with the Pocket 4K specifically. So you can get rid of most of it with noise reduction. Temporal noise reduction, I think it's, if you set it to temporal 5 frames, 3 and 3, I think that should take care of most of it. And then on the spatial, you just put in chroma noise reduction of 15. I think that should fix most of it, but it depends on the severity of the problem. So always look for that. And every movie, by the way, when you're using digital cameras, every filmmaker, or not every filmmaker, every cinematographer will check fabrics to make sure that they are going to work right with the camera and the lenses and all that kind of stuff. Yeah, the red and blue channels, you're going to see clip. It'll look like clipping, but it's actually not clipping if it's in RAW. If that makes sense, it'll look like it, but it's not. You have to. It'll be out of gamut, but you can bring it back in. It's just the way that the colors are being displayed will look wrong, and then you got to bring that back. Usually with the red IPP2, it's really easy. Photographic elements. I shot 2 music videos for an artist with a full crew who wanted 8K red footage, who wanted to edit the videos herself. We filmed for 18 days. It was 2016, and she still hasn't finished the edit. Dude, that's why you don't do that. All that money they spent, and they don't even have a final product. ACES didn't work for me. I use ACES for certain things, but not with the Pocket 4K. I found that if you have it, like the last time I tried to use it, it actually had some serious issues with if you have purple fringing, it like was creating artifacts, and then red taillights, it was doing some really weird stuff. Even when I used the neon suppression. So I'm not sure what it was. I'm not sure if it was something I did wrong, but yeah. Pascal, what do you think about A7S3 coming out? I will talk about that next, actually. So that, since that's the last comment, we will talk about that. All right. Go to my notes. Okay. So there was a video that was created from a well-known photographer that's on, well, I guess I should say photography YouTuber. And they were talking about the A7S III. And the reason why I watched it is not because I'm subscribed to them or anything. I was actually sent it from a friend, and they were like, "What do you think about this?" And I had a lot to say because most of it had, I'm going to say, mostly wrong information, at least in my opinion. And I might have been missing some nuance of what they were saying. But let's just go through it. So first of all, they were saying that 12 megapixels is native 4K, so that makes it like better for some reason. 12 megapixels is not 4K. 12 megapixels is not 4K. 4K is between 8 and 9 megapixels, depending on how it's cropped. Okay, so that was not correct at all. I don't know why they said that. Maybe what they meant to say was that when like it shoots video, that it crops the image into a 4K image, but he was saying 12 megapixels is 4K. It's not. I'm not sure why they were saying that. The other thing that they were saying was native 4K was better than, they were saying like crunching pixels down. They were saying it like that for some reason into a smaller image. And that like for some reason that was better. And I'm going to explain why that's wrong. So first of all, native, you have to understand that most cameras are using a Bayer sensor. If you don't know what that is, just look it up. Okay. It's a certain pattern that red, green, and blue pixels are laid out, on the sensor. And anytime that you shoot an image, let's say it's like a 4K image, okay, you're shooting a native 4K image through the debayering process. This is assuming you don't have an anti-aliasing filter over the sensor. You are going to be losing a certain percentage of that resolution, or I should say the size of the image, really, like the pixels, because of the debayering process. It basically, all those RGB pixels, you don't see RGB, 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 RGB. It takes it and it kind of scrambles it all around until it gets the image. And during that, there's a loss of information. Okay. When by contrast, when a foveon sensor is generating an image, it doesn't do it the same way. The way that it displays an image will not require that debayering process. It's I don't know what it's called, but in order to display the image, it undergoes a different kind of process that's similar. But you'll notice that if you do a one-to-one comparison of a foveon sensor with a certain amount of megapixels, and then another camera that's a Bayer sensor with the same amount of megapixels, the Bayer one will always look softer. Okay. It's not because of the lenses or whatever. It's because of the process that's being used to debayer the image. Okay. So native 4K, if you took like native 4K versus a 6K image that's been super sampled or oversampled into a 4K image, that 6K image is going to make up for all that lost data, or that lost resolution, that lost sharpness, that lost acutance, all that stuff. And usually also that oversampled image is going to result in better, better color fidelity. It's usually going to result in better sharpness, better acutance. It's going to actually give you the full resolution of that 4K, as long as the super sample is being done properly. Okay. So that should be clear. So I don't know why they were saying that. For some reason, that 4K somehow makes it better, that it's native. Even if it was native 4K, it's not guaranteed that it'll be any better. And oversampling also helps to deal with issues such as aliasing, artifacts, banding. I mean, these things, and you have to look at these as like a one-to-one. Okay, I'm not talking about if you take a Fuji camera, you compare it to a Canon camera, and you compare it to a Sony camera. I'm not talking about that. You have to imagine that these are cameras that have the same kind of technology. The only real difference is that one has more megapixels than the other one. Okay, and that they're recording the same kinds of codecs and all that. So if you took like, and this is what people discovered a while ago, when they were first getting into shooting 4K video in an 8-bit 420 codec that was 4K versus an HD, they were seeing that if they took the 4K capture and downsampled it or super sampled it into HD, they generally had better looking color. It was sharper, and it dealt with banding a lot better than the native captures. Okay. And another one that wasn't talked about as much is aliasing. Okay. Aliasing from a super sample, if you have like aliasing that's appearing on a 4K image, sometimes if you super sample that down to HD, the aliasing goes away because the way that the algorithm organizes everything helps to deal with those problems. Okay. So again, I don't know why they were saying that. So, you know, a native 4K capture does not guarantee that it'll have any better images than a 6K oversampled image to 4K, for example. So that's not a thing. The other thing that they were saying was that oversampling is what causes overheating. Oversampling isn't what causes overheating. Bad engineering is what causes overheating. So, you know, what I mean is that if your algorithms for your camera and the way that they're using energy is in a way that is not helping, and then the camera is not engineered in a way to have heat sinks where it prevents overheating, that's the problem. There's oversampling done in tons of cameras that, you know, have been made and are being made now that don't have overheating problems because the way that they're engineered is different. You know, if you have a tiny, tiny little camera body and you're doing oversampling in that camera body and there's nowhere for the heat to go, dude, then that's why it's a problem. It's not because of oversampling. It's because you've engineered it wrong. Okay. So I just want to make sure that that's said. You know, I've had it where there's certain cameras that oversample and never have any overheating problems. And there are other cameras that I won't touch because they have overheating problems. But it's not the oversampling. It's other things. You know, it's the whole of the product. It's not just the one thing that you can point your finger at. Yeah. So another thing that they said, you know, the specs of the A7S III, which, by the way, the specs of the A7S III, we don't know what they really are. It's just all rumors. They said, you know, you don't really, that 8K, you don't really want that because, you know, it's really for cropping in post for certain people. 8K for that? I don't think so. What is the value of 8K? The value of 8K, in my understanding, is that with 8K, you actually can get a cleaner key for compositing. For shooting 8K to crop in is not going to save you money. We discovered that with 4K, it can save you money because 4K is not that expensive to shoot. 4K is not that expensive to shoot, nor is it that expensive to edit anymore. We have kind of workflows and components for our computers and software that makes 4K editing a lot easier and lets us basically get multiple angles or crop in or do, you know, stabilization or whatever, and be able to then super sample that into an HD image, and you'll never know that the original image was cropped or whatever, because you won't see a loss in resolution. And it's because you started from that much higher resolution. And then when you super sampled it, you know, it kind of smoothed it out and all the images look like they're HD. 8K is not a cheap way to get multiple angles and to deal with image stabilization and all that kind of stuff. It's not a cheap way at all. 8K still, like with people who have very high-end rigs, can be a huge problem depending on what kind of files you're talking about. And with 8K, we're going to probably be looking at people trying to figure out ways to compress the images more and more and more and more, which the more, I don't know if you've noticed this, but the more compressed images tend to be, the harder they can be to decode in your playback, which means that your editing is going to slow down. So, you know, you're probably going to have to make proxies and do all these different things in order to have 8K really work right for you, most likely. So, you know, like 8K for doing cropping in post, I don't think so. 4K makes sense. 8K, not really. So the thing is that with compositing, the more resolution you have, the more fine detail you have between, like, especially hair, when you're doing a green screen, say it's a blonde someone with blonde hair and you got these little sprigs of hair kind of sticking up, the more resolution you have and the more color accurate you can get it, the more information is in there, the better the key is going to be when you're comparing one-to-one. You know, you have to assume that you're using the same codec and it's, you know, lit the same and it's with the same technology. Okay, you have to assume all those things. But when you do, the higher resolution is going to give you the better key. It will take longer, but it will give you the better key. Also, for some other people, they think that 8K looks better. I think that's a minority of people. They think like, oh, an 8K image is going to look inherently better than a 4K image. Not really, not in that way. And usually it's going to be people wrestling with, do I want 8K for a specific thing or not? Even shows or movies that are shot on ARRI cams, for example, may opt for their composite shots to shoot on like a super high resolution red camera to make sure that they have no problem with the keying. Usually the problems with the keying, in my experience, is because they don't know how to light green screen. Highest end production facilities in the US, lighting green screen like trash is usually the reason why they think 8K is needed. If you light green screen properly, you often don't need that kind of thing. But anyway, when you have a blue screen and your character is wearing blue, that's probably why it's not working. That literally happened to me. So anyway, yeah. Then the last thing here, lower resolution sensors inherently are less noisy. So the guy was actually right here. They're not inherently less noisy. Lower megapixels does not inherently mean that if the sensor size is the same between two cameras, so you've got 20 megapixel versus 45. I don't know why this ended up being a thing, but like people saying, well, if it's less pixels, it means that it's going to do better in low light. The reason why that's not a thing is because the people saying that are probably looking at their images wrong. Okay, so and I'm talking about stills right now, not necessarily video, because for video, it depends on what they're doing. And I'll get into that in a second. But for stills, if you do a test, you do a test yourself. Take, like this R5 and R6, right? Same scene, you shoot one, you shoot the other. What people will do is they will, go to 1:1 on the raw file on both images and say, oh, look, the 45 megapixel image has way more noise at 1:1 than the 20 megapixel image. The problem is that you are going, like on the size of the image, you're going way further in on the 45 megapixel image than the 20 megapixel image. The 20 megapixel image for 1:1 might be this much. And then for the 45, it'll be like this much. Okay. So you're actually going further in, and that will give you the wrong results, because are people going to be looking at that, or are they going to be looking at the whole size of the image? Probably looking at the whole size of the image. So you're probably asking, well, how the hell am I supposed to check to see which camera between a 45 megapixel or 20 megapixel camera, which one is going to give me better low light performance? Well, you would need to super sample the 45 megapixel image to 20 megapixels, or you need to, find a certain size and say, we're going to compare both images at the same size. Usually it's going down to the other one that most people do, because if you blow up the 20 megapixel image to the 45, it usually looks like trash, right? Okay. People don't usually want to talk about it like that. So you're usually going to go the other way. You're going to make the larger image try to compensate to the smaller one. So let's say you do that, make them both say 12 megapixels. Okay. You make them both about 12 megapixels. Usually, because of the amount of data that's being super sampled and crunched down into that 12 megapixel image, the 45 megapixel image will look sharper and less noisy, because there's more stuff going on to try to compensate for issues. Okay. Whereas the 20 megapixel one won't, especially if you go take the 45 and you go and resize it to 20 and you super sample the image, generally it'll be sharper, less noisy. Okay. And this is especially true if you do post-processing with either image. With a really, really high megapixel image, I've actually done this. If you do like you take your camera and you do stitching where you shoot like maybe 30 images, even if it's like noisy as hell, like you're shooting with a pretty crappy camera, like a Micro Four Thirds camera at 3200 ISO, but you get like 100 megapixel image out of it. Once you squeeze it down to that 20 megapixels for the actual size you want it to be, it will usually look clean, like really, really clean. Like when you view it the full size versus if you just took the one image. Okay. So generally with larger megapixels, more information that you have, generally you will have a final product that will be less noisy and sharper from my experience. But you have to compare similar technology across the board. If you don't do that and you cheat, then you won't see the same thing. Okay. So that's that on the A7S III and the stuff that I thought was wrong mostly about that video. So, whenever you're watching stuff like that, beware of what they're saying, especially if they're saying things that don't make any sense. All right, let's take a drink and I'll check in here. Let's see. Have you ever got your hands on the G2? No. That's the thing is that when I was looking at what camera I wanted to get, the G2 did not have dual native ISO. So I went with the camera, which is a Pocket 4K that made more sense for what I was going to be doing. I think the G2 might have come out later, but I was thinking about the G1 at the time. But G2 would be nice if you were doing the kind of like not the stuff that I do, like more narrative stuff. I guess makes sense with something like the G2. But G2 seems to me like a camera I wouldn't really want to get, to be honest. I am very partial to the Canon Cine cameras for that kind of work that the G2 would do. That new C300 Mark III, I believe is a C300 Mark III. It looks awesome. I talked about the aliasing. What do you think of A7S III coming out? Supposed to have 15 stops dynamic range and raw 4K 60p internals. So if so, it'd be crazy good. Well, it depends. If it's only 8-bit, I wouldn't get it. And the other thing with raw 4K 60p internal sounds like that's not going to be a thing. Because in order to do that, they would have to do compression. Because raw 4K 60p is a lot of data. If you're doing uncompressed raw at that data rate, there's no way that it's internal on that camera. There's just no way. They will not have any cards that can really sustain that. 15 stops of dynamic range sounds nice. I'll believe it when I see it. I just think that a lot of people have been anticipating this thing, and I don't really understand why. I didn't even think the A7S II was that great, in my opinion, unless you were doing very specific things, which were very, very low light stuff, because it had a very aggressive noise reduction that it would do, but it did work really well for certain stuff. I didn't get it because I didn't really like the camera. Current spec, 12 megapixel sensor with fast readout. I'm not sure what you mean by fast readout. Do you mean that that the rolling shutter is very quick? Because if so, that would be really nice. Full HD at 240 frames per second. I'd have to see what the quality is of that. 4K 120 FPS, 10-bit 422, and 4K 120 FPS raw over HDMI. 600 megabit per second. Base ISO 160. Base ISO of 160. For a video camera, that's weird. We want it to be more around like 800. S-Log. See, that's the other thing about Sony cameras. I don't like their log. I think their log is, I don't like it. 16-bit RAW. So let's talk about 16-bit RAW. Are you talking about linear? Because if it's 16-bit linear RAW, you gotta, my last stream, we talked about when 16 bits might not really be more than 12 bits. And what we were talking about was how Ari has what they have, and Ari and Blackmagic Design do the same thing, where they have a 12-bit log encoding, which functionally works the same way as 16-bit linear. Now, if I was to ask you which camera manufacturer is everyone trying to copy in regards to just the overall image that you get out of the camera, it's Ari. If Ari's telling us that they're using 12-bit log encoding, that should be enough for the color information to get whatever it is you want out of the image. So from my understanding, this is their engineering that says that, you're not really getting much out of 16-bit linear except for ballooned data rates. So that's where I'd say I'd worry about the number war there. Red, I think, does a similar thing where they say, oh, it's 16-bit, it's 16-bit linear. Well, if it's 12-bit log encoded, it's going to be the same thing. Ari talks about it being 12-bit log encoded. Blackmagic Designs is 12-bit log encoded. If someone's telling me that it's 16-bit linear, I would say it doesn't mean anything to me. So I wouldn't worry about the 16-bit raw thing. Sony claims 15 stops. Again, I'd have to see it to believe it. If it's 15 stops of dynamic range. Chibas says, fun hanging out. Gotta go. See you next week. Yeah, see you then. No problem. While the speculation about cams lately, the fan-made BMD cam was at least fun and obviously not real. Dude, I don't know. I don't know why. I don't really follow the speculation stuff very much because I think it's kind of boring. It's like hyping a thing that's not there. I remember I stopped paying attention to movie news because it would be like, oh, here's a leak of, part of a trailer for this, Avengers movie. And I'm just like, who cares? Like, just wait for the movie to come out. The movie's not out yet. And it would be like all these speculations of who was going to be in, a movie that wasn't even written yet. And I'm like, who cares about this stuff? But you know what? Just because I don't care doesn't mean other people don't care. I think maybe just people like this kind of thing where they just endlessly speculate on what specs are in a camera and is it going to be good and is it going to be bad? And I think it's a waste of energy, but I guess some people like it. I know that it gets clicks, people like their products and like buying crap. So probably would be a reason. If you got nothing else to talk about, just talk about speculations. I know that because Google watches me and my friend always messes up my YouTube algorithms whenever they send me a video. So I get a bunch of stupid stuff. It prompted, like, when we sign in, that there's like 3 videos from different people talking about their wish list of what will be on the A7S III. And I'm like, do people really care about that? I don't know. I guess people like it. I mean, I guess people like talking about that stuff. It's weird because I don't think they work in the industry in that kind of capacity. They just, maybe it's like a show and tell kind of thing. Like, oh, look, here's specs on this phone. It's going to have this and it's going to do all these features. And I just never got into that. It's so wasted time, and in the end, everything changes. Yeah, and that's the thing, is that that particular camera, the A7S III, has been like, there's been speculations about that for, years. Everyone's going like, oh, when's it going to come out? When's it going to come out? When's it going to come out? And I'm like, dude, like, why are you so worried about it? So A lot of movie buffs are presenting their theories on Tenet's narrative. They say it's a sequel to Inception. I think that Tenet. Is that a movie? Is it a movie called Tenet? Let's see. Let's see. Who's in it? Chris Nolan is a director. It's got John David Washington and Robert Pattinson. How about that? I guess he's coming back. Let's see here. Well, I mean, here's the thing. There's a Wikipedia page that tells you, it at least tells you like all the cast, tells you what's going on. They're shooting it, whatever. I mean, the difference is that that's an actual movie. I guess that's going to happen. Yeah, I mean, is that movie out? Because if it's out, it's scheduled to be released, so it's not out yet. So the speculation is, I mean, why speculate on it? I don't know. Wait for the movie to come out, and then you'll know. You'll know if it's a sequel to Inception after you watch the movie, or better yet, you can have the discussion about whether or not it's a sequel if it's not clear after the movie, because then you'll have evidence. It's an argument to wait to create. Yeah, I just never got into that kind of stuff. Like, I also was not one of those people who would be like, who would win in a fight, Superman or Wolverine? Like, I never had those discussions. Like, I remember when I started working in visual effects, like people would have those discussions around me all the time, and I'd be like, is that a thing like that people talk about? Speculation for I told you so points. Yeah, I guess. Yeah, maybe that's it. Like, people guessing. I know that there's a particular YouTuber I'm thinking at the top of my head that goes, I was totally right about this thing. I guessed and I had these sources. Like, yeah, you guessed like 1,000 things and then you were right on 3 things. And somehow that makes you amazing. I guess it's like a Nostradamus thing. If you just keep like prophesizing things and you just prophesize a whole bunch of things, no matter how crazy it might be, then you can be right sometimes. And then you can gloat about all the times you were right, but who cares about all the times you were wrong, right? Paprika. Yeah, dude. Yeah, Paprika is awesome. That's the animated shorts, right? If I remember correctly. Like, that's awesome. I love that. I remember a friend of mine is the same guy who got me to watch the Raggedy Ann and Andy movie. That movie's a friggin' trip. But Paprika, yeah, really, really cool. Really cool. Tenet was delayed due to the pandemic. Yeah, there was a lot of stuff that was delayed. It sucks. I mean, we're having so much trouble out with it in the United States right now. It's just it's unbelievable. It's it's a big problem. Definitely film industry is getting hit really hard. A lot of industries are hit really, really hard with it. Yeah, I don't know anything about this Tenet movie. In fact, I don't think I've been like with movies. I've kind of like, once they come in, I go like, oh, what do I want to see? It's usually whatever might be available on Netflix that I'm watching. I watch more television shows. I guess Netflix counts as television shows. Like, I watch more of that than movies now. Like, I really like the long form storytelling, because you actually get to, like, a show like Kingdom, for example. Imagine if Kingdom, if you've seen it, if you haven't seen Kingdom yet, what are you doing? Watch Kingdom. But anyway, like a story like that has to be doled out over a long period of time, and you need to give it time to breathe for all the major events to happen, or it doesn't work. There's another situation with that with Avatar, which Avatar Last Airbender, the live action movie is trash. It's trash. And part of it is I don't think that story, if you've never seen the Avatar animated series, it's wonderful, but they're now doing a live action series for that, and that's the right way to tell that story. I'm not sure if it needs to be live action. We'll find out. But to do that story in like 90 minutes or to 2 hours, you can't do it. It won't work. Okay. I think that's something like Lord of the Rings could be crunched down to 3 movies. I think that can be, because there's a lot. I don't know if you ever read the books, but there's a lot of chapters that kind of go nowhere. In my opinion, I'm not a fan of the books, but you could do that in a few movies. But something like Avatar: Last Airbender, there's so much storytelling put into that and so much time spent on each of the characters that it can't really be done in such a short period of time like one film. I think singular films are really good for telling a specific story in a very specific way, to do it right. There's some of the outliers that can do like something really, really, really interesting that's different. But a lot of times, a story that has very, very clear goals and can be told in that time period makes sense for that medium. But yeah, I like the long form stuff a lot more. I can't wait to watch the next Witcher stuff. I love that. Loved it. And what else am I looking for? Dude, Norseman. You guys ever seen Norseman? That's another kind of thing that can't be done in like just a film. It needs to be doled out to you, like the different stories and how it all unfolds needs to be doled out to you over time. And I love that show. I much more appreciate and love that kind of stuff than films nowadays. It actually feels weird to watch movies after watching so much TV shows. You must not be on Twitter. Comic Twitter is all about. Yeah, I don't like Twitter. My brother keeps telling me that I need to get on Twitter so that I can have use Twitter to publicize when I do stuff like this or when I make a new video or to keep people more engaged. But I don't like Twitter. It often turns into a lot of arguments and fights with people about things, and it's like not a very healthy atmosphere. I think it's what I don't like about it. Just found out that Salvador Dali had a Disney animated short called Destino. It's very Dali. Let me look that up real quick. Destino Dali. 2003? What? Can't be. Oh, there's interesting. This is 2003. Really? Let me see this. Animated short film released in 2003 by Walt Disney Feature Animation. Destino is unique in that its production originally began in 1945, 58 years before its eventual completion in 2003. Oh, it sounds kind of like a Thief and the Cobbler situation. Or was it Thief and the Cobbler? Yeah, I think it was Thief and the Cobbler and Black Cauldron that had similar issues. Project was originally a collaboration between Walt Disney and Spanish surrealist painter Salvador Dali, and features music written by Mexican songwriter Armando Dominguez and performed by Mexican singer Dora Luz. It was included in the animation Show of Shows in 2003. I am going to have to watch this. The face on this, hold on a minute. Let me hold on. Okay, so look at this. Look at the face on the right. Okay, and now show you what it makes me think of. Immediately, when I see that face, it makes me think of this. Look at that face. Let me see. Let me see if I was, yeah. I mean, I guess one of them looks like it's making an angry face, but dude. If you ain't seen Zardoz, you got to see it. Yeah, I'm gonna have to look at that. I'm gonna ask my friend about it because he's always got his ear to the ground on cartoons. I don't think I ever heard of that. That looks really interesting. I remember seeing, I think it was a Dali piece where he like cuts open a cow's eyeball on camera. Dude, mm-mm. It was really cool though. I forget what that thing is called, but it's a really cool film. Very surreal. The guy liked to experiment for sure. Yeah. Hey, Steve. Yeah, dude. Zardoz is pretty amazing. Um, uh, that's one of those movies where you watch it the whole time going, very interesting movie. It's weird. Like Zardoz is it's one of those funny things. Like Sean Connery did so many interesting things in his career. Like if I remember correctly, he didn't like how messed up. Like if you've ever watched the older Sean Connery um, James Bond films, his character is a slime ball. Like he's a slime ball, and I guess he didn't like that how misogynist things were. So then he went and did Zardoz. I mean, like watch that movie and you tell me if it's any better as far as his character. Uh, and then um, I guess he turned down the role to play Gandalf. If I remember correctly, he turned down the role for Gandalf in Lord of the Rings, and it was kind of a huge mistake because he could have made a lot of money in that role. And like I guess it was one of those things where he just didn't understand it. So then he went and did League of Extraordinary Gentlemen. It's like, oops. And then he decided to come out of retirement to do Sir Billy, which is one of the worst animated films I think I've ever seen. So he makes interesting decisions. That's all I got to say about him. But yeah, like Sean Connery in that, like that, it's like the chaps or whatever. Like his outfit in that is incredible. It's incredible. Very unique film, Zardoz. It does have a groaner, which is when you find out why it's titled Zardoz. What a groaner that is! It almost feels like an old episode of Star Trek, like original series. The way it's written and the stuff that happens is very like it's like if you took the original series and you pushed it a little bit more adult. It's like that. If you've ever seen Rick and Morty, there is an episode that is very much like Zardoz. Wisecrack philosopher YouTubers like that movie. They say it's smart underneath. Which one, Zardoz? I'm dude. I don't know about that. There's nothing really to the imagination in Zardoz. It's pretty obvious what's going on. Like if someone tries to tell me that a movie like what is it, Holy Mountain, you know, or El Topo, like those kinds of movies are like if you're a simpleton if you don't really get it. Like I'm sorry, but those are just films that are weird experimental films that are not going to work for a lot of people because they just don't work for them. A movie like Zardoz is just pretty clear what's happening. The thing is that when it comes to anything that's art, you don't have to like something to understand it. My brother's really funny because he does not like the Beatles, does not like the Beatles music at all. And it doesn't mean that he can't understand or appreciate the kinds of things that they did, but it doesn't mean he has to like the music and listen to it. So I can't say that Zardoz is really that philosophical or amazing. It's kind of like what did I see recently? Oh, it's a Jim Jarmusch movie. The Dead Don't Die, I believe. Hated it. Hated that film. Hated it. Hated it. Hated it. And in the first like 20 minutes, it's okay. Like I get what they're doing in the first 20 minutes of that movie, but then it starts to get really annoying. Like how, in my opinion, up its own butt it gets with what it's doing. You know, if you've ever seen if you've ever seen Rubber, which is a movie about a tire that can kill things or blow them up with its like psychokinetic powers, that like basically to me Dead Don't Die is like a zombie version of Rubber, and I hate both movies because there's really good concepts that they ruin with their own themes, and I get really annoyed with that kind of stuff. um yeah, I get really annoyed with that kind of stuff. So it's not like I don't get it. It's not like I didn't get what was going on in The Dead Don't Die. It's not like I remember having an argument with someone because I didn't like a movie, because I didn't like Rubber, and someone telling me, "Oh, like yeah, Rubber is like you're a normie and you don't get it because you're just too simple." And I'm like, "Dude, I get it. It's pretty freaking obvious what they're trying to say in the movie. I just don't like it. I didn't enjoy it." Like you can understand things and not like it. Like it's like a joke, right? Someone tells you a joke, because you don't laugh at it and you didn't enjoy the joke doesn't mean you didn't understand it. You just didn't like the joke. You didn't think it was funny. Okay. So, uh, yeah, I don't think it's that smart, Zardoz. I don't think it is. Watch The Apple. That's another one of those that I think they thought it was smarter than it was. The Apple like is amazing. Dude, Scanners is awesome. What are you crazy? Scanners is great. Scanners is great. I like Scanners. I have a funny feeling. I'll check if Criterion has a film pack for this one. BFI has, because of Sean Connery. Connery turned down Morpheus and Matrix. What? Wait, was that the one? He turned down Morpheus for the Matrix. I think he also turned down the role as Gandalf, if I remember correctly. Let me see if I'm lying, because if it's the Morpheus one, that's like a double. Yeah, John Connery turned down the role of Gandalf in hit movie franchise Lord of the Rings because he didn't understand the part. So you're saying turn down Morpheus in the Matrix? Russell Crowe turned it down. Yeah, if Sean Connery would have played Gandalf, he would have made nearly $450 million. I don't know about the Matrix one, but that would be another blunder. That would be another blunder. Oh, Buckaroo Banzai is awesome. I like Buckaroo Banzai a lot. I watched it. I think it was 3 years ago. Sorry, my dog's barking. I watched Buckaroo Banzai, I think 3 years ago, and I couldn't believe that I hadn't really heard of that movie. And my friend kept saying, "No, you got to watch it. We got to watch it. We got to watch it. You'll love it." And I'm like, "Okay." And it was great. We watched it on the same day as. So I didn't have high hopes for that one, but I liked it. And then we also watched it on the same day as Hell Comes to Frogtown. Hell Comes to Frogtown sucks, which I was really surprised about. I did not like that. I think we watched also They Live. They Live is great, but did not like Hell Comes to Frogtown. It's like when you read what Hell Comes to Frogtown is supposed to be, you're like, dude, this has to be awesome, and then it's not. Dead Don't Die was pretty bad. I love his other movies. Yeah, I'll have to watch them because that one I was just like it just I just hated it. Like after the first 20 minutes, I was just like, okay, I get it. Like I get what's going on. I'm kind of over it, and it just kept kind of going that way, and just not enjoyable for me. I have to watch some more of his movies, but that was not a good one. Yeah, $450 million Sean Connery turned down. I mean, that would make me scared to turn down anything. Speaking of not turning down anything, who's the actor that doesn't turn down anything? Nick Cage. Nick Cage is great. He'll be in anything. Connery turned down Morpheus in Matrix for a League of Extraordinary. I don't know about that one. I didn't see anything on that, but that, like I said, that would totally be a mistake. If you haven't seen Sir Billy to see his greatest work, Sir Billy. Sir Billy. It's great. By great, I mean horrible. Yeah, so just a few more minutes here, guys. Let me know if you have any questions or anything you want to talk about. I love talking about movies, or TV shows. While we finish this out, I'll be down to watch like a lot of weird stuff, but if it's kind of like up its own butt with its art and with its stuff where it kind of takes over the movie, it kind of annoys me. Like I've never gotten through Clockwork Orange because I always turn it off. I never got through Donnie Darko. I turn it off. Yeah. Even the trailer for Hell Comes to Frogtown was god awful. Well, the thing is, like, you think it's going to be something that it's not. Like I judge a movie based on how entertaining it is. Like, if I am entertained by a movie, even if it's super cheap and like it's poorly acted, if I have fun watching it, I don't care. Like, let me send you a trailer for a really good one. This movie is incredible. This movie. Let's see here. Yes. This movie is fantastic. Watch this movie. If you want to see an awesome movie that was done in like a dude's garage, this is the one. Incredible. Manborg is one of my favorite movies. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy is fun to watch on a fun evening. I haven't seen that one. Hitchhiker's Guide to the Galaxy. Donnie Darko is a good film. It's a bit philosophical, but for me, good. I have to try again. When I first watched Donnie Darko, I got annoyed at the dialogue, and it's sometimes it's just like a thing with my brain where if I'm not in the mood for it, then I can't watch it. I have the same problem with. I know that might sound weird because it's like not probably made for me, but how fast the characters talk to each other is really hard for me to follow. And I believe, let me see if I'm talking out of my butt. Make sure I'm not. Yeah. So there's the one of the writers or creator for Gilmore Girls also wrote or created a show called Marvelous Mrs. Maisel. I can't watch those because like the way that the characters talk, it just drives me nuts. Like it's almost like the dialogue is a machine gun. And I didn't even know that Marvelous Miss Maisel was done by someone who was involved in Gilmore Girls. And then like I told my wife, I was like, I don't know if I can really deal with this. It makes me feel like when I was trying to watch Gilmore Girls, it really like kind of bothered me. Like I didn't like it. And it turned out that it was done by the same person. Manborg, like Manborg is super cheesy. It's supposed to be like that. Like you have, like, my opinion is you got to go in with an open mind. Okay. Go in with an open mind. Don't go to try to see someone make, a Spielbergian movie. It's not going to be like that, but it's going to be very entertaining, and it's like silly and like kind of dumb. Like a lot of the stuff is really, really dumb, but it's very fun. Very, very fun movie. I love it. And you guys are going to start to understand my taste in movies. I would say that it's very eclectic. I like a lot of classics and all that kind of stuff. At the same time, there's some like really cheesy stuff that I love, and then there's also like what people would consider bad B films that I love to watch because I think they're really fun. For example, this isn't a B film, but one of my favorite movies to watch with a group of people is Battlefield Earth because it's so freaking funny. Like if you watch it with the idea of like having a beer in your hand and laughing at it, it's a wonderful experience because there's so many dumb things that are so funny in Battlefield Earth that it's so bad it's good. It's so bad that you will have a fun time watching the movie. Was it Mac and Me? Is another one. Like it's a ripoff of E.T. and it's really funny. Troll 2, if you've ever seen Troll 2, you know what I'm talking about. So yeah, for sure. Like I'm not knocking B films. I love B films. Like that's most of what I watch now as far as movies go. Like I will most of the time when I'm watching movies with like one of my friends who hosts a movie night on Saturdays, we're watching B films. And, you know, I would have never seen Basket Case had he not, you know, recommended that. Basket Case is awesome. And then there's like each one of the other Basket Case movies are even more nutty than the previous one. And with B films, like the thing is that even if it's a bad one, you realize like that person got a theatrical release. I can like, and if it's really bad, you go, dude, I could probably make my own movie and get a theatrical release too. I just need to, you know, hit the right levers. And, I mean, that's usually how it goes in order to get a movie like shown in theaters or to have it released on Netflix or on Amazon Prime or whatever. So, okay, Emotion VFX. I'm going to copy paste this for my friend because he likes all this stuff. Yeah. Killer Sofa. I've never seen that one. Sick cult stuff sells best on VHS. Yeah, you know, I never like I hadn't got into like the what are they called? Like I don't like movies like Hostel. You know, like I don't like the horror that I like is something like Hellraiser works. And Hellraiser is like a really well-made film. It's not just that it has gore and, you know, deaths and all that kind of stuff, but the editing in it, the way it's shot, the writing in it, everything works perfectly. Like it's really, really good. So that's the kind of horror that I generally like. I do not like murder porn. Murder porn has no place on my TV. I do not like watching it. I will turn it off if it starts getting that way, just because I don't like it. Like Cube works because it's more about the characters and not just murdering people. But once a movie starts to turn into just, you know, how many sick, twisted ways can we murder people? I just go, not really my thing. Yeah, Killer Clowns from Outer Space is really a trip. Like that's a weird one. The first Saw is good. Because it's more of like a thriller kind of movie. It's not so much about the body horror. It's kind of like a fine line between the two for me. Like some horror kind of like, you know, like if you watch Hereditary, that's a really good one because it's not so much about the body horror. Even like Nightmare on Elm Street, like some of it works fine in that. But when it starts to get, it's like when it gets too realistic for me, and when they're clearly making it just about being like, it's hard to explain. It's hard to explain. It's like you gotta, when you see it, you know what it is kind of thing. Like Hostel is one thing, and then you've got, you know, something like Halloween, like the first Halloween. those are two very, very different kinds of horror movies. So Halloween I really like. Hostel I do not like at all. Cannot even watch that kind of stuff. I mean, even when I tried to watch Zodiac, and there's a very realistic murder that happens in the beginning, and I stopped watching it. I could not watch that. It's weird. Like it's something like just goes off in my brain. Yeah, Nightmare on Elm Street. When I was a kid, you know, when the one where the woman's feet gets stuck in the stairs and she can't like walk up the stairs. Dude, I would have nightmares about that. I would not want to go up my stairs at night when I was a kid because I thought that I would get stuck in the stairs. And I saw it when I was a kid, so it was not good. I happened to Get Out the other day and the original Omen TV series on the tube. Oh, nice. I actually haven't seen Get Out yet. It's one of the movies that I've been really wanting to see. It's just like I have a whole list of stuff that I just haven't seen yet. Mandy, I have not seen Mandy, so I don't know. Velocipaster, yeah, I haven't seen Velocipaster. I do want to see it though. I hear like I'm not sure if that is a intentionally bad movie because like there's a whole genre that I've called bad exploitation, where it's people who are making intentionally bad movies to cater to the cult crowd like that likes bad movies. So I haven't seen it because I think it'll fall into that category. But I've seen enough about it. Like for example, Sharknado is not a kind of thing that I'm interested in seeing because I think like the silliness of it seems like it would wear off on me in like 5 minutes. Like just the idea of there being a tornado with sharks in it or whatever is like is already like okay. But Velocipaster, I mean, it might be cool. I haven't given it a chance yet. I'll have to do that. Yeah, bad exploitation. Yep, that's what I call it. And it's like if you've seen Samurai Cop 1, it's brilliant. Like Samurai Cop 1 is the perfect bad movie that's also really fun to watch because there's a certain like they're trying to make a movie. Like they're obviously making a ripoff of Lethal Weapon in that film, but it's so bad that it's hilarious to watch. Like there's if you haven't seen this yeah, here we go. So this is the scene that everyone talks about. So warning, there's some adult language, but that film, Samurai Cop, where that scene's from, it's that funny like pretty much all the way through. There's some really crazy stuff that happens. Like the guy, he you know, in some scenes he's wearing a wig and a ball cap, and then other scenes he's not wearing it anymore. There's one fight takes place in 3 completely different locations. It kind of reminded me of like Mortal Kombat, where like when they fight Scorpion, when Johnny Cage is fighting Scorpion, and he kind of like goes to different places, but it looks like it's like unintentional in Samurai Cop. So that's like a good one. Like that's a good bad movie. But then Samurai Cop 2 is bad exploitation. They do really dumb things in it that piss me off. One of those is that they hire actresses that are awful. Like they are awful and clearly not even trying. Tommy Wiseau is in Samurai Cop 2, but he's not in it enough. And it's like the only good scene in my opinion. And then they just kind of like try to call back to Samurai Cop, but not let it be its own thing. Like they should have made a real movie. Like they should have said Samurai Cop 1 was bad and we didn't mean it to be bad. Let's make Samurai Cop 2 like awesome, you know, like do it really cool, like Kung Fury. That would have been fine because Kung Fury is not where they're intentionally making it like a bad movie. They're just cheaply making a fun movie, if you know what I mean. There's a difference. And yeah, my opinion is stay away from bad exploitation films because you will not be happy with them for the most part. They mostly have like one joke that lasts throughout the whole thing and it sucks. So, yeah. Yeah, Samurai Cop is one of those ones that are just amazing. So, all right, so that's it for this evening. Starting next week, we will be going back to Wednesday, 4:00 p.m. Pacific Standard Time for the live stream. Yeah. So, yeah, that's it. If you have any thing that you need help with or whatever, you can always send me an email. My email is in the About page. You have to use the website version of YouTube to find it, or whatever. Oh, yeah, and thank you to those who sent me a happy birthday email. That was very nice of you. Thank you so much for that. That was really cool. I did not expect that. So yeah, and yeah, if you need any help with anything, or if you have a shot that's not working, or you have a question about any of the videos, you can, leave it on the video, or you can send me an email and we can work together and figure out solution for you. So all right, have a good evening. Stay safe. Beware of COVID, and I will catch you next week. Bye for now.